Picture this, it's the summer, but unfortunately it's raining. So instead of climbing outdoors, you're climbing in your local gym. After warming up, you climb on a difficulty that you normally wouldn't struggle on. But after climbing for a little bit, you find that you're more pumped than normal, you're more tired, and that whilst climbing this grade, you are struggling a little bit more than you normally would. You're over gripping, you're slipping off at parts, and you're struggling to find good friction on holds which would be jugs to you normally. Now you start to question, have you gotten worse at climbing, or are you a weaker climber? Or is the truth that it's just 95% humidity in the climbing gym? Now, if you're in Britain, this is undoubtedly true. If you're not, I'm not sure, but probably. I think most climbers look at conditions as a sort of modifier that can be broken down in simple terms such as you lose 15% friction, or a climb becomes a grade harder, or it's just a little bit more difficult. But you could just be stronger, you shouldn't blame conditions. Whilst making this video, I put a poll out onto my Instagram asking my followers whether conditions could ever be a valid excuse. And the results were actually quite surprising. 57% of people said yes, conditions could be an excuse in climbing, whilst 43% of people said no, just be stronger, and that conditions can never be a valid excuse whilst climbing. And this was a surprisingly high number, considering that I had left the question on quite an extreme note. So if you agree with the 43%, or you're just curious anyway, by the end of this video I hope to convince you that conditions could possibly affect the boulder in your climbing a little more than you would believe. Now, the first boulder that I want to discuss is a boulder that I'm sure a lot of you will already be familiar with. It's in Multital, Austria, and it's called Bugeleisen, which is a direct translation to iron in English, as in the iron that you iron clothes with, because the boulder is perfectly shaped like an iron. The climb itself has a sustained difficulty. It doesn't necessarily have a bunch of easier moves and then one really hard crux moves that gives it hard grade. It's sustained throughout the whole climb. It's a typical, very overhanging, tension crimpy test piece at the 8B plus 8C grade boundary. Now, in Multital, Austria, it was first ascended by Clem Loscott, an Austrian climber, in 2001, and it was rather of a futuristic ascent. And I say that because it's still one of the most popular or dream boulders today. I mean, recently we saw Aidan Roberts, a notable, really strong 9A climber, go to Bugeleisen and actually flash the stand, which is graded at 8B+. As well as the stand that was FA'd by Clem Loscott, you've also got a sit-down start version of the boulder, which gets 8C in brackets plus. I'll get to that. Now, this was FA'd by Nale Hucktyvel in that name, every time it gets me. Okay, Nale Hucktyvel in 2014, and at the time he'd claimed it was his longest standing project to date. Now, obviously he hadn't climbed Burden of Dreams until 2016. If you want to know more about that, please check out my previous video on Burden of Dreams. Now, Nale said it was a very difficult boulder, but more so it was a boulder of extremely high quality, one of the highest quality boulders he had ever climbed. But it was also a really long battle. Not with the boulder itself, but with conditions. Now, Multital, Austria is extremely wet throughout most periods of the year, and you can actually see on one of Nale's old blog posts, which are now archived, that he discusses his battle with conditions. When he originally went to try the boulder, he couldn't climb it for a week due to it being completely soaked. And then even when the conditions were a little bit better, but just a little bit humid, he found it an entirely different problem. Moves that were easy before, such as the top part of the boulder for him, became extremely difficult. He said he dropped the top bit 4 times in a row, whilst on really good days he would never drop it once, and that the crux of the boulder would actually switch from in the lower half to the top half. Due to the conditions, Nale actually talked about having to change his beta in multiple points, kind of having to have 2 different betas, one for good conditions, one for bad conditions. And at this point, is this not just an entirely different climb using the same piece of rock? And this rhetoric has been discussed about Bugeleisen a lot of times by a lot of different climbers. It is a boulder that you do need in prime conditions, and a little bit of humidity or wet holds and it becomes not just a grade harder, not just 15% more difficult, almost impossible. But the main point is that conditions didn't just change this boulder's grade by 1, it didn't make friction a little bit different, it completely changes the boulder, either making it completely impossible or changing where the crux is, making certain moves require different body positions, which to me shows why conditions actually do a lot more to a boulder than just make it a little bit harder, and you're not just using conditions as an excuse. But I know what you're gonna say, that is an 8C graded boulder where the margins are extremely small. You can't mess up anything, you have to have body tension and positioning down perfectly to climb at that grade. Surely it's a little bit more simple for easier boulders. Now this is where I'd actually like to bring up a boulder that I've climbed myself in the Lake District, UK, in a little crag called Kentmere. It's situated in a very beautiful forest, but it's in the Lake District, so it's often wet and the boulder itself is extremely mossy. Now it's called Middle Earth, sit start to be specific, and the difficulty of the boulder is pulling on at the sit start. Your right hand is on an extremely small hold and your feet can't really give you much. Now when I climbed this boulder, it was actually one of the first boulders I'd ever climbed outdoors, and it was graded 6C, and I was pretty happy. It went, I think, after 2 tries. A couple of my friends who were with me on that trip never really looked at it. They were climbing different boulders at the time, but when they went back to the crag a couple months later without me, they brought it up to me that they actually couldn't believe that I'd done the boulder. They tried to pull on and, being much stronger than me, expected to find it also easy, but they couldn't pull on at all. They found it impossible to climb. So out of curiosity, I then went to go check out the boulder on the website we use for climbing in the UK Climbing. And to look at the grade history and discussion around the boulder. And when the boulder was originally FA'd, it was actually given 7B. Fast forward to when I've climbed it and it's now 6C. I think it could possibly be even lower now. That is a massive difference in grades. So why such a jump in grades? Surely the person who FA'd it didn't get it that severely wrong. I mean, you can actually find a lot of people after the original FA agreeing that it is 7B, maybe a little bit soft, but 7A plus at a minimum, right? So it's not that new beta's been found, it's a couple holes, there's really only one way to climb it. It's just because of conditions. When it's slightly humid or wet, the boulder becomes genuinely about 5 to 6 grades harder, but on a really dry spring day, say, it's actually not that hard. The friction is really good, it's much easier to pull on, which again pushes this idea that conditions aren't just a small modifier that can sometimes affect the grade a tiny bit. They're completely changing, especially outdoors in an uncontrolled environment. I think indoors, where it is a controlled environment, humidity does add a lot, but it is more predictable. The modifiers I kind of discussed at the start, you're not exactly wrong. I mean, I'm not sure how you would pinpoint the percentage of friction that you're getting unless you do some experimental tests, but you're not far off, I guess. But outdoors, it's completely different. If there's boulders you want to climb specifically that will be in really bad conditions, you don't even go there until they're going to be in good conditions, because you know it'll either be impossible for you or just a completely different boulder itself. So next time you're out at the crag and you pull on and it just doesn't feel as good as it used to, instead of maybe blaming yourself, take a step back and appreciate the wider area that you're in and the wider natural effect on the boulder. It is a rock outdoors, it's going to be affected by the atmosphere, so don't be as harsh on yourself. Maybe take a step back. Don't climb a boulder in terrible conditions necessarily and possibly get yourself injured trying something that actually is going to be a lot less enjoyable than if it was in good conditions. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching all to the end. Make sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe. I appreciate it a lot. Thank you very much. See ya.